Oh, Father, thank you for your word, God, and especially your prophetic word, Lord, that just reminds us, God, that you are in control. You're on the throne, Lord, of our lives, of this world, God, of everything. You always have been, you always will be, Lord. And so, God, we just look to you and praise you, Lord, and ask that your Holy Spirit would lead us through this time of study right now, and Lord, instruct us and teach us, Lord, from your holy word, we ask in Jesus' name, amen. Okay, actually, this prophecy began chapter 10, verse 1. It says, in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a message was revealed to Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar. The message was true, but the appointed time was long, and he understood the message and had understanding of the vision. So Daniel describes in verses 2 and 3 how he had been mourning and fasting for 3 weeks. And, that's a long time. And maybe that's what I should do, but, that's kind of what Daniel was doing, mourning, fasting 3 weeks. And on the 24th day of the 1st month, verse 4 says, while he was next to the Tigris River, that's western Iraq, verse 5, he says, I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose waist was girded with gold of Uphaz. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like torches of fire, his arms and feet were burnished bronze in color, and the sound of his words like the voice of a multitude. Upon seeing this vision of someone whose characteristics are the same as the glorified Lord Jesus Christ in Revelation chapter 1, Daniel describes how those who were with him fled in terror, and he himself ended up completely stunned, face down on the ground until no strength was left in his body. The remainder of chapter 10, we looked at last time, recounts how incrementally Daniel was brought back to his full strength through the touch of this being that appears first on his hands and knees in verse 10, and then he's standing upright and speechless, however, couldn't speak. While he was being restored physically, while this was taking place little by little, he's getting up, he's standing there, he can't speak. While that's taking place, he's being informed of the level of spiritual warfare that had been taking place just in the transmission of the message that he's about to receive. You see at the end of verse 12, it says, Daniel, he says, don't fear, from the first day that you set your heart to understand and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come because of your words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. And behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left alone there with the kings of Persia. In verse 14 of chapter 10, Daniel was told why this being had been sent and the reason so much spiritual opposition was being brought against the spiritual messenger. Now I have come, he says, to make you understand what will happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision refers to many days yet to come. Your people is speaking of the Jews. Latter days is not speaking of the Mormons, okay, not the latter day people, but of a time just prior to what we know as the 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ. In the Old Testament, you'll see that phrase, and it's always speaking of the time just before the kingdom age, what we know as the Lord's second coming. Many days yet to come, it says. So a message pertaining to what is going to take place far off in the future. Information that those opposing God's plans for planet Earth do not want to get out. So it must be pretty important. Daniel himself, having regained his speech in verse 16, he confesses at that point, at the end of verse 16 and verse 17, how he didn't have the strength to even receive this important message. He says, how can I, your servant, verse 17 of my Lord, talk with you? As for me, no strength remains in me now, nor is any breath left in me. So then again, verse 18 says, the third time, The one having the likeness of a man touched me and strengthened me, he says. So a touch from the messenger was needed in verse 10 just to revive Daniel from laying face down, stunned on the ground, like passed out. He touches him, and then he's up on his hands and knees. And then another touch in verse 16 that restores his ability to speak. And now this third touch, verse 18, empowers Daniel, probably 90-some years old at this point. He's given the strength to receive divine communication. This is inside information on events that are going to take place in the future, so that those who serve the Lord here on earth can have an advantage over our enemy, our adversary, the devil. Verse 19, he said, "O man, greatly beloved, fear not. Peace be to you. Be strong, yes, be strong." So when he spoke to me, I was strengthened, and said, "Let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me." So here, this whole first chapter of this three-chapter prophecy, this goes to the end of the book. The first chapter is just preparatory. It's just preparing the vessel who's going to receive this message. And he says, so he's given the strength. He says, I need strength. And so he spoke and was strengthened. Verse 20 says, then he said, "Do you know why I have come to you? And now I must return to fight with the prince of Persia. And when I have gone forth, indeed the prince of Greece will come. But I tell you what is noted in the scripture of truth. No one upholds me against these except Michael your prince. Also in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. And now I will tell you the truth." So having strengthened Daniel physically, spiritually to receive this message that had been sent, the messenger asks rhetorically there in verse 20, "Do you know why I came to you?" The inferred answer being given back in verse 14, he would be saying, "Well, I think you've come to make me understand what's going to happen to my people in the latter days." Right? Yes, exactly. That's why I've come. And then it is added by the messenger how he was going to have to fight against some evil entity that had some kind of influence over the Persian Empire. And after that, the messenger says he's also going to have to fight against an evil entity that will have influence over the Grecian Empire. And that had yet to even come on the scene. So interesting behind-the-scenes insight is given into the spiritual realm. But the messenger says in verse 21, he says there, "But I will tell you what is noted in the scripture of truth." The scripture of truth is another way of saying that which has been determined beforehand by God and is inscribed in the writing of truth, or the scripture of truth, our Bibles. So the picture here that you see as laid out is this battle taking place in the spiritual realm, in which a breakthrough has been made into the physical realm so as to bring important information to Daniel and all those future generations up to us regarding future events that are going to impact God's people significantly here on this earth. But Daniel is also told, as we move into chapter 11, how this messenger was also involved in the events that took place in the first year of Darius the Mede. Speaking of the first ruler of the Medo-Persian Empire, Cyrus the Persian, Darius the Mede were co-reigning for the first part of establishing the Medo-Persian Empire. If you've been here Wednesday nights for our study in Ezra and Nehemiah, otherwise read those in conjunction, you see in those Old Testament books how the Medo-Persian kings, these Persian kings from Cyrus to Artaxerxes, were very influential in reestablishing the Jews back into the promised land after the Babylonian captivity. It's amazing to read that. It's like they get taken into Babylonian captivity, and then when it's time to return, as we've seen through Ezra and Nehemiah, God moves on the heart first of Cyrus to return them, then on another Persian king to let them continue rebuilding their temple, and then as we saw, as we move into Nehemiah, now another king allows Nehemiah to come back and rebuild the city. All of it, Nehemiah says, is by God's hand, which it was. So they're reestablished back in the land. Now here, we're given a glimpse into how and why that had taken place. Major spiritual warfare was taking place in the spiritual realm in conjunction with the prayers of men like Daniel, Nehemiah, Ezra, Haggai, and Zechariah the prophets. So a lot of spiritual activity was going on at that time while the Jews were returning and being reestablished in the land in preparation for a couple centuries, 3-4 centuries later, when Christ, their Messiah, is going to come to the earth. Now, once again, in verse 2 of chapter 11, this messenger says, "And now I will declare to you the truth." So at this point, he is given the message. That which we have recorded here in our Bibles. It's going to take us a couple weeks. It's a very valuable message. The last one Daniel had all kinds of warfare just to get it to him. He was passed out. He had to be strengthened just to receive it. So personally, I read this and I go, oh God, help me to understand this. Obviously, there is some valuable information for those who serve you. Behold, verse 2. He says, and now I tell you the truth, behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion, and who do according to his will. The 4th Persian king after Cyrus would be Artaxerxes of the book of Esther, father of the Artaxerxes we read about in Nehemiah chapter 2 on Wednesday. He is known by secular historians for his vast wealth that he accumulated, which is alluded to in verse 2, and he is also known in secular history for his wars with those in the area of Greece. It's called Macedonia. You can read about that in history, and what it's saying here, he stirred them up, in verse 2, resulting in Greece rising up to retaliate, as spoken of in verse 3. A mighty king shall arise, rule with great dominion. This prophecy at this point from verse 2 to verse 3 jumps over about 150 years of earthly history and about 9 more Persian kings between verses 2 and 3 to the time and the person of Alexander the Great, is who is being spoken of in verse 3. You study Bible prophecy, understanding the selectiveness with which God's word deals with historical figures is key to understanding the people and events that are important from God's perspective to the furthering of his eternal plan. Genghis Khan, Buddha, the Gandhi, Aaron Rodgers, they may be important on a worldly level in world affairs, but their lives have no impact for eternity, unless the Packers are losing. But to some people, But so this one particular Persian king is mentioned in verse 2. He's a very important king with regards to the Jews and God's redemption of humanity. It was his role at the time of Queen Esther and in reestablishing the Jews back into the land that made him important. After him, a mighty king shall arise, verse 3, who is known to the world as Alexander the Great. He will rule with great dominion, dominance, supreme power, and do according to his will. So he carried out whatever he desired to do for a short time here on earth. He had supreme power. which was due to the spiritual power that was at work behind him at that time. That's what was pointed out back in verse 20 of chapter 10, where it says, do you know why I've come to you? And now I must return to fight with the prince of Persia, speaking of some demonic entity. And when I've gone forth, indeed, the prince of Greece will come. So Alexander the Great was empowered through satanic power. Evidently, as all of those are, who come upon the world scene that have some amount of authority over multiple nations. They have a multinational influence. They are energized satanically to the extent that they're able to wield that kind of influence here on planet Earth. In verse 36 of this chapter, we'll see that the Antichrist will have a similar but even greater ability. He's going to do according to his own will when it comes to global affairs. Somebody who may even be alive today, as there are people just pushing. The UN just last week was meeting. I don't know if you saw this in the news, but they just instituted for the first time, historical time in history, a global tax. It's going to be on all the nations, international taxation. So get used to having another tax come out of your check, man. But they instituted it became, just big news. If you're a Bible student, you're going, whoa, dude. They instituted global tax. Well, at some point, somebody is going to have to oversee this global thing that is coming together, as we know the Bible says, and it's coming together very rapidly. Believe me, they see, there's blood in the water with the whole COVID thing. And they're like, man, we're going to be able to manipulate this. People are just bending over and doing whatever we tell them to do. And it is taking place so fast, it's amazing to see how quickly this is getting organized. But the Bible says this is what's going to happen. But here, we see a Persian king mentioned. He had a role back in that regional area in the reestablishing of the Jews back in the land. Then this mighty king comes satanically energized. He shifted the world power from west to east then, Alexander the Great. And some theologians, you look at this and you think, this guy's able to do whatever he wants. He has complete, ability to do his own will. But he's doing his own will under the sovereign control of God. An all-powerful God who is supremely good will not permit anything evil in his creation unless he is all-powerful and supremely good enough to bring good out of it, which is what he does. He allows evil to have a certain extent right now because he is establishing redeemed human beings through it. So when it says here that this mighty king shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will, I got to remember that his free will is allowed to be exercised for a very short period of time on what is a teeny tiny planet. One of billions of planets within a teeny tiny galaxy when compared to the innumerable other galaxies in this vast universe of which God who created it transcends and lives in an eternal realm. So when the mighty earthly conqueror does according to his will, I got to keep that in perspective. Some people, they get all freaked out about, you don't have free will. God is so big. He can allow this in this little area. On a universal scale, Alexander the Great and his conquest of the Middle East wasn't great at all. It's just a little tiny blip. But it did have eternal consequences for God's plan of salvation here on earth. That's what all of this is in the context of when I remember that. God is working all this out for our salvation so that we can be with him. That all of this has been done unto that goal. This mighty king, verse 3, shall arise. He shall rule with great dominion, do according to his will. And verse 4 says, and when he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the four winds of heaven, but not among his posterity, nor according to his dominion with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be uprooted, even for others beside these. So when he has arisen, when he stood up literally, as soon as he achieves his greatest strength, Alexander the Great, is, about 150 years after Daniel received this prophecy. But this guy is going to arise as soon as at his greatest height, his kingdom will be broken up and divided four ways. So the Grecian Empire under Alexander the Great wouldn't gradually diminish and become weak. But at the height of his world conquest, at 33 years old, he conquered the whole world and he died in a drunken stupor in the city of Babylon. And the empire that he had conquered was divided between his four top generals. His throne wasn't passed to an heir. So not among his posterity, verse 4 says. He didn't have an heir, no kids, nor according to his dominion. So the following world authority, broken into four divisions, was inferior to anything Alexander the Great ruled over. But it's during that time, this is where this just sets the stage for this vision. It's during that time of this four-way divided empire that this portion of prophecy now takes place. Which just, you'd think just the details so far, you got to admit, that's pretty remarkable for somebody writing 150 years earlier. That this is how it's going to come on. Greece is going to come on the scene. Their ruler is going to be really strong with great dominion, but at his height, he's going to completely fall apart. Their kingdom will be broken into four pieces. There's going to be a kingdom divided toward the four winds of heaven, verse 4 says, north, south, east, and west. Also, verse 5, the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes, and he shall gain power over him, have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. Now, this is where, if you're not into history, sorry, God is. He totally lays this out. From verse 5 through verse 36, there's a lengthy portion of detailed history, human history. We're going to see that this only deals with two of the four divisions of the Grecian Empire. The northern kingdom, also known as the Seleucid kingdom, modern-day Syria. The southern kingdom, also known as the Ptolemaic kingdom, Egypt, which is being spoken of in verse 5. Those two are focused upon because their main battleground is the Promised Land, where the Jews were resettling at that time after Babylonian captivity. It's fascinating. If you've been to Israel, I've been there twice, and you're driving around and you can't see everything fast enough. You're going, that's where David killed Goliath. That's where Napoleon marched all of his troops through the Promised Land. That's where the Ptolemaic and Seleucid wars were taking place. You see all that and your head's just spinning. All this history, dude, just takes place in that area. Because God says, this is where I'm going to, work things out for the global redemption. The struggle between these two kingdoms is detailed from verses 5 through verse 20, as we'll see tonight. Then from verse 21 to 36, there's going to be an even greater insight given into this historical figure who was introduced in chapter 8, known as Antiochus Epiphanes, who is an Old Testament type of the coming Antichrist. The eastern-western divisions of this Grecian empire split into four, to the four winds of heaven, north, south, east, and west. The eastern-western divisions are not dealt with because they have no bearing and no impact on God's chosen people, nor upon the city of Jerusalem and the Promised Land. But the way that the southern and northern kingdoms began, that's what's being stated in verse 5. This is how when the kingdom broke in four, this is how this battle began. When Alexander the Great died, a king in the south became strong, it says in verse 5. Also, the king of the south shall become strong. So the ruler who was over the southern area, Egypt, the southern kingdom under someone named Ptolemy, became strong, became an independent kingdom there in Egypt. But another of Alexander's princes, he had 4 generals they called princes. Another one of his princes, verse 5 says, there he became even stronger. Seleucus is his name. He gained power over the king of the south and had great dominion and a large rule in the area of Syria. So you have Egypt, you have Syria, and you have Jerusalem right in the middle. And this is the stage for this prophecy. And at the end of some years, they shall join forces. For the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north, make an agreement, but she shall not retain the power of her authority, and neither he nor his authority shall stand, but she shall be given up with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. And so try and follow along with this, but these 2 kingdoms, the northern and the southern, the northern Seleucid kingdom and the Ptolemaic kingdom down in Egypt fought one another for a lengthy period of time, verse 6 says, and at the end of some years, what takes place in verse 6 happened after the original 2 generals of Alexander the Great died. So after a length of time, an alliance was made between the southern Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt and the northern Seleucid kingdom in Syria. That alliance was made through the king of the south giving his daughter in marriage to the king of the north. That is an event that is recorded in secular history. Someone named Berenice was used as a bargaining chip. But her marriage dissolved when her husband died. This whole thing reads like a mini-series on TV, okay? And while there was a temporary reprieve in their wars between the north and south, her authority, verse 6, as a queen was taken away, and any authority that her Egyptian father had there in the northern kingdom was also taken away when her husband died. Him who strengthened her is who her husband was, verse 6 says, this northern king. But from a branch of her roots, verse 7, from a branch of her roots, that is prophetic language for her brother. Okay, her roots are his mom and dad, and from a branch of her roots, from her mom and dad, her brother, one shall arise in his place, who shall come with an army, enter the fortress of the king of the north, and deal with them and prevail. And he shall also carry their gods captive to Egypt, with their princes, their precious articles, silver and gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So here, a total conquest of the northern kingdom by the south. It's pretty sad when your gods that you worship are captured by your enemy, and your God's taken Egypt. So the brother of Berenice, this woman, the southern kingdom, rose up in military strength and conquered the northern kingdom, took away great treasure, took away their ruling class, took away their gods, and he continued more years than the king of the north. And see, all the time this is going on, this is why it's important, whoever was in control controlled the Jews. And so at this time, the Egyptian leader there, the Ptolemaic kingdom, controlled Jerusalem because he controlled Syria. And he outlived his northern counterpart, who makes a futile attempt to retaliate according to verse 9. So also the king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. So he tries to, get back at him. However, verse 10 says, his sons, the king of the north's sons, shall stir up strife and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through. Then he shall return to his fortress and stir up strife. So this verse is describing a partial recovery of the northern kingdom by the sons of the king of the north, spoken of in verses 7 and 8. He initially had two sons that stirred up strife. That's a way of saying they got stirred up, they got fired up and said, dude, let's get our nation back, our country back. So they got fired up to regain their father's former glory. One of them, verse 10 says, prevailed. He will be seen to be the Antiochus the first. His son is the infamous Antiochus Epiphanes. But this guy, he was able to reestablish a fortress on the border of the southern kingdom and stirred up more trouble there. This fortress, as spoken of here in verse 10, it says, his son shall stir up strife, assemble a multitude of great forces. They come back, they take back Syria, and they come down into the promised land. The fortress, to return to his fortress, is thought to be in what is modern-day Gaza Strip. So it's kind of on the border of this southern kingdom. And from there, they began to stir up strife or make trouble. While you read one hand, for you and me, it can be, what's the big deal? Why so much detail over these particular conflicts by these kingdoms long ago and far away? It's just like a history lesson. While it may not impact us directly, I'm sure it was an exceptionally big deal for those living in the middle, as the Jews were, having multitudes of military personnel marching back and forth through their backyard, waging war in the land. These fired up Seleucid soldiers who said, we're going to go take it back, and they fought their way all through the promised land of Gaza Strip. They probably weren't the friendliest people. They probably came marching into the promised land where the Jews were and said, hey, is that your herd of cattle over there? We're hungry. We're going to take all of those cattle you've been raising for years, and we're going to have a big barbecue tonight. Oh, you have a problem with that? Well, here, let me just take your head off, and maybe you'll get over it. That's how this was going on. So as all of this warfare was taking place, the Jews had an incredibly detailed, totally accurate account of what was going on. Think of that. While they were there, they could look at this and go, here's what's coming now, here's what's coming next. They had a detailed prophecy, completely accurate, of what was happening so that they could trust in the fact that God is in complete control. This is total evil. In the midst of all that's going on, God's in control. Look it. He said this is how it's going to play out. All of this was yet future from Daniel's perspective. But the Jews are given, there's over 100 specific prophetic details right in these few verses that were fulfilled perfectly. Secular historians bend over backwards trying to disclaim the writing of this by someone in Daniel's day. That couldn't be. No way. Obviously someone after the fact wrote this, even liberal Christian scholars deny that this isn't predictive. This couldn't have happened before the event. But see, skeptics have done the same thing with the even more specific prophecies that were fulfilled at the first coming of Jesus Christ. Oh, that couldn't have taken place. And guess what? We are living, like I say, probably to the point of sounding like a broken record, for those of you who know what a record is. But we're living in the days when Bible prophecy, once again, is coming to life, and more prophetic details have been laid out in this book for the days we're living in than were at the time of Christ and at the time of the Seleucid Ptolemaic Wars. And after this is all gone, the skeptics, guess what? They're going to be gone. They're not going to be like, oh, that couldn't have happened. This Antichrist global leader couldn't have came on the scene. There's no way that could have happened. Because guess what? Jesus is going to be reigning at that time. But, we see these prophecies that pertain to our day and beyond. We're going to see further on in this prophecy of Daniel here. And so in reading this and seeing that all of this came to pass precisely as predicted, people can be skeptical. Go for it. But see, as someone who trusts in the Word of God and do your homework, I can trust and rest in God's prophetic word for me, which is why all of this matters. If he did this much for that, the things that are going on today, these people running around in such fear and they're so confused, they should be in fear because they have no clue what is taking place. But as a biblical Christian, I should have complete understanding. It's like you got to go day by day now. Wow, the UN just met and made a global tax. That's significant in biblical prophecy. And what are they going to do next week? What's going to happen to our nation? Is everything going to return to normal? I'm not counting on it, because what I'm reading in the Bible is just going right along a track that God says, I told the Jews during the time of the Ptolemaic Seleucid Wars what was happening. I told them at the time of their first coming of their Messiah, and they weren't watching for it. And they missed him. And I'm telling you what is taking place in the days you're living in. So you don't have to worry, and you can know how to have an advantage over our spiritual enemy. But here he says the northern kingdom, they're going to get fired up. They're going to make a military incursion all the way to Gaza Strip. And then verse 11, the king of the south, he's not going to stand for that. He's going to be moved with rage and go out, verse 11, and fight with him, with the king of the north, who shall muster a great multitude. But the multitude shall be given into the hand of his enemy. When he has taken away the multitude, his heart will be lifted up and will cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail. For the king of the north will return and muster a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come at the end of some years with a great army and much equipment. So once again, this mustering of armies would be taking place on God's property, where it says there, the king of the south shall be moved with rage. You'll go fight him. The king of the north, verse 11, is going to muster a great multitude. It's all taking place on God's property, so to speak. The king of the south is going to fight with the king of the north, and he's going to prevail over him, run him back out of the Gaza Strip. The king of the north is going to muster a great multitude, but after, that victory, verse 12 says, the king of the south is going to conquer this great multitude, then the king of the south is going to be lifted up, it says in verse 12. When he's taken away that multitude, his heart's going to be filled with pride. He's going to become self-confident. And he will cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail. So having defeated such a large army coming from the north, ultimately verse 12 says he will not prevail over the north. Because verse 13 says the king of the north is going to return with an even bigger army and much equipment. The word equipment speaks of an abundance of supplies. They came for the long haul. Weapons, supplies, everything needed for a prolonged campaign. The king of the north here, again, this is the father of Antiochus Epiphanes. He's called Antiochus the Great. And his son is going to call himself Antiochus the Divine. He's got a major ego problem. So the south, having won a big victory, gets self-confident and foolish. The north gets well-armed. They come ready for an aggressive war. It is during that time that the Jews are going to become embroiled in this war, and they're going to get set up for Antiochus Epiphanes entering their land and totally destroying them. It says in verse 14, now in those times, the king of the north is camped out in the promised land, shall rise up against the king of the south also violent men of your people, Daniel, who shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they're going to fall. So a coalition of troops is going to join against the king of the south, against Egypt, which is going to include ungodly Jews, violent men of your people. During this back and forth fighting between Syria and Egypt, the Jews were alternately being ruled by one or the other, depending upon which of them, north or south, were in power. At this point, being spoken of here, they had been under the rulership of the king of the south under Egypt for a long time. The event spoken of here, again, this is recorded in secular history, there in verse 14, was an attempt by unwise Jews to band together with the king of the north in an effort to gain their independence from either of them. And it ends up making it even worse when Antiochus Epiphanes comes along, we'll see. But see, nobody can say God didn't give them a heads up. No one say, oh, I wish we'd known. Verse 14 says that the conduct of these violent men of your people in exalting themselves will only prove to fulfill this vision, Daniel, that's being given. Look at what it says. It says, violent men of your people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision of what he's telling him right here. It's all told right up front, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come. He's going to build siege mounds, take a fortified city. He's going to set forces of the south shall not withstand him. Even his choice troops shall have no strength to resist. Now, there's no definite article in the original language before the word siege mound. So the idea here in verse 15 is the king of the north, he sets up camp, he establishes strong military foothold. He sets up siege mounds. Not just one, but he sets up siege mounds in the promised land. He takes fortified cities as his fortified cities, and he plants military personnel in the land of Israel, so that even the choicest troops of the king of the south, it's saying, will not be able to resist him. But he who comes against him, verse 16, this formidable force that will be mustered in the land against the king of the south, he who comes against the king of the south shall do according to his own will, and no one's going to stand against him. He shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his power. Now, the language in verse 16 is elevating God's land, the glorious land, to the central point of this whole prophecy. There's a place of prominence in all of this. All these earthly entities are going to war, they're going to fight, they're going to go back and forth. But at this particular time in history, the king of the north is going to be positioned in the glorious land. He's going to be having his foothold there. When it says that he will be there with destruction in his hand, that's speaking of the deception that he's going to give to the Jews. He shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his power. So the Jews are going to fall into a trap with this man, with this ruler, at least those who weren't reading Daniel's prophecies. The king of the north at that time treated the Jews very favorably. He made friends with them. He schmoozed them, basically, in order to use them, to use their land, to use their cities in this war with Egypt. But the northern kingdom's hold on them is going to become deadly. It's going to be to the destruction, to their destruction is what it's saying at the end of verse 16. Meantime, the king of the north, verse 17, he shall set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom there into Egypt, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do. And he shall give him the daughter of women to destroy it, to destroy this southern kingdom there in Egypt. But she shall not stand with him or before him. So what this is saying, once this guy is established in the promised land and he's going to take over the southern kingdom, he sets his face to make this move to enter and take over the kingdom of the south. His initial attempt, and this is fascinating when you read it in secular history, his initial attempt at takeover was diplomatic. And he used an influential woman, it's saying, there. He's going to set his face to enter with the strength of the whole kingdom. He's going to give the daughter of women as his way of entering and taking over the southern kingdom. We can do this the hard way. We can do this the easy way. And he took an influential woman of the northern kingdom and used her to have a peaceful takeover. This woman is known in secular history by the name of Cleopatra. You may have heard of that name. But see, the intrigue that was planned through the use of this woman by the king of the north didn't work. And they've made movies about this. She was sent to destroy the southern kingdom of Egypt, but ended up standing with them, defecting of the king of the north, and not being for him. Cleopatra defected, became famous, very positive historical figure in Egyptian history. And you've probably heard her name because she's a very famous woman. But this is, God saying this is how it's going to work out before it even happened. And then after this, he shall turn his face to the coastland. So this guy got all the way there. He was going to make his big move, and he got shafted, basically. And so he turned around, and he went to the coastlands, and shall take many, but a ruler shall bring the reproach against them to an end. And with the reproach removed, he shall turn back on him. Then he shall turn his face toward the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble, fall, and not be found. Now, speaking here, again, of the northern king Antiochus I, he failed in his attempt to take over Egypt after this huge buildup and everything. Got shafted by this one woman, happens a lot. He set his sights on conquering other areas of the Middle East. He built a navy, is what this is talking about, and this is what he did. And through the use of a navy, he turned his face to the coastlands and had an initial success there around the Mediterranean Sea until he ran into somebody, a ruler, it says in verse 18. This ruler was the first ruler who would become the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire began to arise and started beating this guy back. He ran into Roman resistance. A ruler is going to bring the victories that Antiochus I, king of the north, was having to an end and send the king packing back home, at which time he will go back to the fortresses of his own land, verse 19 says, where he will stumble, fall, and disappear off the pages of history, which is what happened. But his son, Antiochus Epiphanes, is going to come to power. And he's going to become a type of biblical prophecy of the coming Antichrist. And there's going to be much detail of him, as we'll see here, because he played a huge part, not only in the time just prior to the first coming of Jesus Christ, but he also provides a picture and an incredible type of the Antichrist who is going to come just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. We'll go through that and we'll break that down. So, hold that thought. We'll come back. We'll pick up at verse 20. Now, Father, thank you, Lord, that your word is so precise and accurate, Lord. And God, it's amazing. And yet you know these things. You know the end from the beginning. And so we can trust you, Lord. If you know that, if you know all these things, God, you know it's going to take place in our lives. And we can just rest in that, God. And thank you for giving us a word that just shows that. And this is just puts it in the face of critics who got to try and deal with it, and they can't. Thank you for the Dead Sea Scrolls, Lord, that put many critics to sleep, back to shut them up, Lord. By the discovery of that in the days we're living in, to confirm and undergird this precious gold we have here in this book. We can learn these things, and this is interesting, Lord, but God, I pray that we could apply the fact that, Lord, this is in here for us as well, to help us not be freaked out, not get caught up in the day-to-day. Things can seem overwhelming at times. But God, help us to have an eternal perspective. All of this is working and preparing everything for the time we enter into your presence. God, help me to remember that when things become overwhelming or stressed out, Lord. Lord, I gotta set my eyes on things above, not on things on earth. Things on earth, you got that all worked out. You got it planned out, and you show it way in advance that you do. I got to be living for the time you're preparing me for, God. And so may I surrender that and serve you, Lord, and not get caught up and distracted in these daily things that can be so distracting in themselves. We praise you and thank you, Lord, in Jesus' name, amen.